I'd love to discuss with each of you and get your perspective on what you think a smart city is and how we can make successable ones. So, Jessica,
sure.
why don't we start with you?
Closest to you.
You're the closest, you win.
So I believe, I liked what you were saying. I think our belief is that, firstly, just more and more people, the urbanization is a major trend, right? If you just looked at China 40 years ago, the degree of, the percentage of people in cities is like 18% or so.
Right.
And right now it's 58%. And that's a lot of strain. If you look at it as a mechanical problem, there's a lot of strain on cities. Right. Our belief on where we can add value is really, we're not short of infrastructure. China has actually have very good infrastructure if you compare to many cities in terms of just the road infrastructures, even in terms of like cameras, Internet of Things and stuff, right? So it's a fairly connected city in a sense. So where we think the next evolution of smart cities is how do you use technology to better leverage the assets that you have, if you will, right? Because there's limited capacity in the land, in the people, and how do you use technology to make it more accessible for the rest, right? And I'll give an example of some of the things that we do. One is on traffic, right? And we all know traffic congestion in cities, etc., is a nightmare. It's a perennial problem that you solve. How do you do this? So besides pricing and stuff like that, we use our AI to help with some of the traffic forecasting. This is actually a mathematical problem. Actually, technically, the roads can actually absorb a lot more, right? If you actually know how to sieve in the right traffic. We were able to also reduce the amount of accidents by about 90%, the speed by 51%, just with better forecasting and management tools. So this is leveraging the assets that you have. The other example I'll give is, for example, in healthcare. And again, this is a perennial problem all across the whole world. And we know, so in China, we have about 8 million doctors, but it's way not enough for the cities. And all these resources there, the good ones, are actually concentrated in the tier 1 cities, right? So it's not widespread across. So how do we use technology to help with that, right? So one of the things that we do, for example, simple things like AI medical imaging, right? Which, you don't have a lot of qualified diagnosticians. Sometimes they don't, especially in the lower tier cities. And we use now our technology to do up to 90+%, be able to accurately identify long nodules, which are like 3 mm from CT scans and stuff like that. And we do now work with about 2,000 hospitals across in China, and that helps to improve accessibility and quality of healthcare with the limited resources that we have. So this is what we believe make the next evolution for smart city is really leveraging, using technology to make the best use of the assets that we have, the limited assets, to make better lives for people.
Great. Miguel, following on that, Jessica makes some interesting points about using smart cities for public safety and health. Often there's conversations about sensors and picking up trash and other sort of service delivery. What do you think, what's the balance there in terms of improving the service that cities deliver versus the ability to save lives, for instance?
Yeah, I think, so first of all, the definition question is probably still the most important one, because I often say if you ask 6 experts, maybe 3 experts, you'll get 6 answers.
Easily.
Right? I think that we're still trying to figure that out collectively. Cities have been smart for a long time. It's a matter of recognizing that now there might be new tools available, whether that's data by way of sensors or other means. There are new tools available to move the progress further and forward. But I think I also caution that we maintain focus on who we're trying to serve and what they're trying to achieve. In the example of mobility, let's remember why people are getting on the train in the first place. It's to get to a destination safely, comfortably, affordably, and thinking about what is it about that the need for mobility that we can maintain kind of focus on. So I think for me and for our program, and this goes back to when I was in San Francisco and New York, is trying really hard to maintain focus on the people we're serving and what it is that they want. How do we make tech work for people in a way that makes their lives measurably better is key. And so I think certainly we can look at the use of sensors, the use of data to improve healthcare delivery, transit services delivery, public safety, but again, not losing sight of the ends for sake of the means.
Kostas, tell us how you perceive a smart city, but also maybe following on what Miguel has said, talking about how you look at the audience, who you're delivering service for, and what the goals are.
So, in your question, what a smart city is, to begin with it, is that smart city is all about the people, the way that they commute, they communicate, they walk, they are going shopping, or they're having fun. And this is, I think, the misconception and the misunderstanding that you said before, because we often understand smart cities as a technology project, and we are missing the real users, the real people. And I will give you an example. Let's take fake news as a case, not regarding smart cities, but just as a case. We have now so many digital tools to read news, to check the facts, the daily facts, and unfortunately, we are still more and more believe on fake news. So digital tools, in this case, means that it's not enough to get where you want to go. It's not enough. So we have to give focus on people. We have to give focus on the real needs of the people. So this is the first thing about smart cities. The second, and as you said before about the audience, is that you have to choose your challenges as a city, because a smart city is a city that uses technology to deal with its challenges, and it depends on the challenge. Right. So that's why we have so many opinions about what a smart city is, because every city has different challenges to deal with it, and this is a problem. So, to resume, pick your challenges, use technology, but keep the people in your mind, keep the real users in your mind. This is the 3 steps.
Let me get a poll from the audience, perhaps, to see what everyone's thinking. We have a question about what makes the most important measure of success for a smart city, and would love to get some feedback. And the options when they come up will be connectivity, inclusiveness, and economic growth. If you could only pick one, what defines a smart city for you? And then we'll ask you to respond.
Sure, no problem.
Okay. Well, everyone's given a good answer. Question is, we talked a lot about this actually last night. Is inclusiveness at the forefront of what cities are trying to develop, or are there economic interests that sort of usurp those? What do you think in terms of inclusiveness? Are smart cities developing in a way? Are cities prioritizing the inclusiveness in people and developing these programs?
Well, I think if I were to pick, actually I would pick slightly different. Well, all 3 actually
Which answer
important.
Did you like?
I had in mind actually economic growth.
Okay.
Because, we can be inclusive, but if I really have to pick one, people become happier if everyone is doing better.
Right.
So personally, I would have picked economic growth. But as you said, all 3 are actually important aspects of it. But I do think that inclusiveness is often neglected. We were chatting just now. I think it's very interesting some of the things they are doing. From my perspective, I think inclusiveness is good because, like I said, there's always unequal distribution. Inequality has been a problem, for hundreds of years, technology can either widen it or reduce it, right? And the way I see it, which is why I'm so passionate about this, is like I said, if technology can make it more affordable for everybody,
right.
That will be the way to do inclusiveness. But I have to admit that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this because there's an access problem, and some of the things that they were sharing were quite interesting. Yeah.
Right. Well, Kostas, from a government perspective, clearly you're serving residents of a city, and so inclusiveness must be a top priority for you in Athens.
Yes, exactly. If I were a chief technical officer of Athens, my answer will be connectivity, but I am the digital officer, so I have to think more out of a technical form. So yes, inclusiveness is was and is a very key element to our strategy and to our yearly digital roadmap of Athens, because we have to reach as many as we can groups in Athens and reach them and try to get them in the digital strategy of the city and give them opportunities to learn and to use technology and use new tools and get more opportunities to have a job in Athens during the crisis, but not only in the crisis. So inclusiveness is very important, and that's why we have to, in order to achieve inclusiveness, we have to put 3 elements in our strategy: digital equality, openness, and sustainability. These 3 elements will secure our strategy in order to be inclusive and reach as many people as we can.
Miguel, you've spoken often about doing good, and as part of Mastercard's sort of motto, do you want to discuss a little bit your perspective on doing good and doing well?
Yeah, I do, but first I want to thread something that I found really interesting here. I think that the way I would answer the question is connectivity is of all forms. So digital connectivity, economic or financial connectivity, physical connectivity, aka mobility, but having a connected fabric in the community is key to achieving inclusion. And inclusion is key to ensuring that the economic growth, to your point, actually makes everybody happy and doesn't create division. So I think it's a matter of they have to be built on each other. I don't think you can pick one and achieve what many of us would consider the optimal outcome. It's a matter of layering them in a way that ensures that the digital future that we want to create benefits everybody, not just economically, but socially and other ways, right? So that's the way that I would kind of thread the 2 answers together. What's interesting about what we see from an inclusive standpoint is a very obvious alignment that to what cities, Athens and others that we're working with are trying to achieve for their communities and our corporate objectives, right? So our CEO and everyone in the organization really lives and breathes this mantra of do well by doing good. And there are elements of things that we can do that are on the good side that then lend themselves to the do well side. And inclusion is one of those things. If we help a city, Athens or any other city on the planet, create inclusive outcomes and grow their economy and achieve that economic growth in a way that is meaningful to everybody, then truthfully our business grows along with it. Right. And so we have this very interesting and fairly unique ability to lean in a meaningful way into the social impact goals that Kostas, for example, wants to achieve, right. And still be consistent with the mission and the DNA of the organization.
It's an interesting mention of sustainable solutions. Jessica, maybe you can give some thoughts from the private sector, how the public sector can learn. It's obviously very cyclical in the public sector. People come into office and priorities change. All the buzzwords about all of the predictive analytics, blockchain, these new technologies that really the private sector is leading. How can the public sector use these tools and learn from what private sector businesses are doing?
I think there's 2 aspects in which the lessons from private sector could be applied in the public sector world. I think one is actually the focus on the people, I think, which is your point, right? Because private sectors, we only survive because of our customers. So to me, it's very much running a city is kind of like Ping An, we are an organization, 1.8 million people serving 500 million customers, right? And as CEO, I have to think about how we run that and deliver it, efficiently in a sense. So I think that's one aspect which I think sometimes when I speak to government, that might be forgotten because there's a separate role to that, and I do think that's quite important, which could be applied. So that's one area. The other area is, as you said, technology. The private sector, because of the competition, if you will, have been much more aggressive in applying some of the new technologies. And I think some of which are quite relevant. In particular, I think artificial intelligence and blockchain.
Right.
On artificial intelligence, like I said, there has been a wave of lots of investments in hardware, right? Smart cameras, lighting, etc. Right? But how you use that, actually, fewer people have looked into it. And I think that is something that we can do a lot more. I already gave the example of the traffic management. The other project that we're currently doing with the Shenzhen government now is that we realize elderly care is also a big problem of cities, right? And especially in China, where it's a one-child policy, half of the elderly live by themselves, right? And half of the problems happens when they have a stroke, they have a fall at home, and nobody is there to look after them. So simple things like the cameras that you have at home, right? We're designing a solution together with the government that will alert if they fall at home, or if they suddenly doesn't move as much within their home, and they will alert the nearest neighborhood hospital, if you will, so they can provide the accessible care. So things like that, for me, are the level of technology is quite mature now to be able to do predictive as well as recognition type of stuff. Right? So that's in artificial intelligence. The other area I think has huge uses is blockchain. Right, and not so much in the cryptocurrencies, which has been, I think, the wave of speculation over the past 5 years or so, but more the underlying blockchain, especially when privacy is such a big deal, right? There's always this dilemma about we want to use the data to do stuff, but then how do we still ensure privacy and stuff, which is a perennial problem. Blockchain, I think, can solve some of that, and I personally believe the data ownership is with the consumers. Right, you look at health records. There's a pilot project we're now doing with the provinces in China, not just centralizing the data, because a lot of governments may centralize data, but they are worried how to use it in a responsible way. And now we're trying to build something whereby you could use the blockchain to administer rights. The rights is the consumer. I can decide who gets to see my X-ray scans. I can decide who gets to see my prescription drug, right? In a way that if you can put the right. So I think it's a good technology as a tool to allow this type to make it much more efficient, that we can leverage data while still respecting privacy.
And this issue of how to use, I spoke recently with Marius Silvesterson, who runs Smart Cities in Copenhagen, and he said the days of we will build it and they will come are over. And instead, what cities should be doing is reaching out to the department heads, the business owners, and finding out what the needs of residents are and building solutions to fit those needs. Since you've both either worked in cities or worked in cities, do you see that process followed in cities by looking at needs and then building solutions? Or is it more building smart city solutions to see how they can be utilized after?
I mean, I think there still is an element of experimentation, but doing it with the community instead of kind of in a silo is really important. We did that in New York City. So there is the element of helping people learn the possibilities. But I do think that what's most important is that we're listening to the needs and wants of people for the benefit of their quality of life improvement, and then being very focused on being responsive to that and that sounds, when you say that out loud, everyone in the room says, yeah, it sounds obvious, but it's not always that obvious or executed in practice. And I think one thing that I've seen begin to really shift, there are some cities that do it really well and others that are learning, but in the number of cities that I worked for and now work with, it's interesting to hear them stop calling them voters and start calling them people, right? Because it might seem subtle, but there's a lot that is communicated in that slight change of term, right? Voters are people you appeal to every election, and people are people that you're responsible for or responsible to all day, every day. Because particularly, I mentioned this at dinner also, I have a particular respect for mayors because they have to be concerned with big things like the impact of automation and AI and climate action goals and sustainability and energy, and they still have to pick up the trash and fill the potholes. Right. You have to blend those things, and so I think you're seeing cities that are beginning to recognize that getting people involved in that process is very, very helpful. And the private sector partners that support that and get behind that and, in fact, help make that happen, I think are going to find those mutual partnerships that you'll see begin to emerge successfully around the world.
Great. And Kostas, what's your perspective on this?
I totally agree. Mapping the needs and the problems and the challenges of a city is the first key, is the first step to develop a smart city, to design digital projects. The other way around is rather problematic because, as I mentioned before, if your starting point is technology, and then you are designing a project in a real city, and you're based only on technology terms and issues, then you are going to have probably a non-functional project. The other way around is the way that I do believe, to map the problems, map the challenges, map the opportunities that you have, and then develop a tailored solution for the city, for a neighborhood, for a group of people in your city. And even if you fail, it's not something that we have to be afraid of. Failures is a great thing in the digital sector because we are learning so many lessons from failures. It's not something that we have to be afraid, and we have to discuss about failures and the projects that didn't work in our cities in the way that we design it.
Can I add something to that? So one word I think is key here is empathy. And what Kostas just explained about the failure and being okay with it, I think you develop some courage and some ability to accept that failure. If you've engaged people along the way, then you build empathy. But you build empathy between the public sector and the private sector, which we saw begin to be achieved with our programs in New York, and we're now leaning in hard from the Mastercard perspective. But when you involve people in the conversation, then all of a sudden the empathy kind of disarms the conversation in many ways. So if they've been with you through the journey, then your failure is their failure, but they see the intentions behind it. And so I can't emphasize that enough as a positive component to this collaborative or people involvement, however we want to describe it, is to use it to develop that empathy that will lend itself to kind of an appropriate amount of courage and risk-taking.
It also requires, I really do agree with that, because I think it requires a change in the way that typically governments and private sector work together, right? Because if most of it goes by tenders, right? So if you think the traditional was usually the public sector or the government has a need in mind, then they maybe send out a tender and then you do that's what the real world does. But I agree that in this new arena, because we're trying to solve issues to improve the lives of people, right? Using technology and other means, sometimes it's a collaborative effort that together we need to build on, and it requires a different approach, working together. And I think you probably have the most experience, having worked both in the government as well as in the private sector. And I think because this is a big problem. It requires everyone actually to work together. But it's a very meaningful project to work together on.
What's the tolerance for failure in the public sector? I mean, clearly in technology sector, there's an attribute of failure as a success because it helps you to iterate and find other solutions. And perhaps in broader business, it applies as well. But in the public sector, there's a lot of complications around trying something, not knowing the outcomes.
In the classic sense, there's close to zero, right? Because you have an election coming up, and any failure you have is going to be used by your opponent to knock you down. I think that's precisely the point I'm making, though. What we were able to institutionalize to some degree in New York City with our program was that safe space. We went into it just setting the expectation that we're trying to solve something new. We don't know what the solution is, so we're going to make a good attempt, but we involve the community. And that was the safety net, that the community was a stakeholder. They were at risk as much as us, right? And so I think that again helped change the dynamics of the courage necessary to engage, but then also I think the courage to continue pushing. To the tender point, the reason that tenders are useful is we know precisely we want a pencil that works like this, that looks like this, because the pencil hasn't innovated much in 100 years or so. We're solving different problems than being able to write on paper. And those solutions, in some cases, haven't been built, so we can't define it. And so I think, but again, having that open, honest conversation with the community helps balance that a bit.
Well, this is a good segue for one more poll question, and then Kostas, I'll ask you to respond first to it. What does the audience think that the role of cities is in innovating, city governments that is? Is it to be an enabler, to lead the way, or to just stay out? To make each of you guess what you think the answer is going to be.
We need a secret ballot.
Right, everyone has to write their answers and pass it up to the front. All right, so well, what do we think the answer is? Kostas, do you think that the role of the public sector is to, oh, here we go. Let's see what the audience thinks first, and then you can answer. Yeah. Okay, so it seems pretty clear. The goal is to be an enabler, to offer cities the opportunity to support private sector innovation.
So I will agree with the audience, and not for populist reasons. But yes, I will agree. Public administration is like a big corporation, and it's very difficult for them to change, to be innovative, to produce innovation. And in many cases, public administration is even worse from big corporations. So the cities has to be enablers in order to help the most vibrant groups of the community to bring innovation to the city. And this is the role that we have to be focused on. And this is very important. Give the data, give the infrastructure of the city, open the data, open the infrastructure of the city, and let, in a structured way, the people to produce innovation. And the people, I mean not only the individuals, of course, the big companies, the corporations, the small or medium companies, everyone, the universities. The city is a sum of stakeholders, and you have to be close with them and help them to produce innovation.
Miguel, would you concur with that?
Yeah, I think that's the healthy way. I think historically we've seen governments either invent things like the internet, or just have things kind of imposed on them. And I think we're at this era where it's really important to have the public-private partnership be more than just a buzzword, right? And this real active engagement. And the fact is, what I've found in city space, again, when I was on that side of the table and now, is what's really valuable is access to the assets and the infrastructure and the domain expertise, right? Technology companies and the like have different sets of resources, but the cities really have this very important and irreplaceable asset, which is the city itself. So I found that when technologists were given the opportunity to engage, test, pilot, iterate even in response to feedback in that real non-sterile environment, the development cycles were much faster and much more meaningful, and you ended up with a much more robust, resilient solution.
Right. Jessica, let me ask you, since Penang has so much information, cities will be 75% occupied by people by 2050. What is your vision of what this future will look like, these smart cities that we'll live in 25, 30 years?
As I started off saying that our belief in smart cities is using technology to leverage the limited hardware infrastructure and human capital assets that we have so that it will be better lives, right? So our vision is then one in which encompasses everything from education to healthcare, elderly care I mentioned, to mobility, which is everyday part of our lives, to environmental protection, whereby you can have something, you set a policy, and it happens.
Right.
Right. So, and it's not a small means. I'll give two examples like environmental protection. Everybody talks about, we need to have zero emission standards, etc. But it's a pain to enforce.
Right.
But I think we're in the stage in the world whereby technology can make it actually doable. Right? We now have, and it takes a step at a time. I really echo with what they're saying. Innovation happens in small little pockets. And we're so many cities whereby we can start with something. So we're working on environmental protection with one city in Anhui. It's so small, but still they have more people than Singapore. Whereby we use technology leveraging on the internet sensors for the top 10%, but also other technologies to cover all these small, medium enterprises, because the pollution doesn't happen from the big enterprises, it happens from the small enterprises. So it really makes it doable. I think we can also do with education. Some of the experiments we're trying now is very exciting. Maybe my grandchildren will get to use it, whereby we keep talking about you have tailored education for everyone, right? But no matter how many reforms we do, there's always a limited number of good teachers, and there's always different people with different paths. Right. And I think at this point in time, technology can make it really AI education tailored to individuals. We're working with a few of the top schools in China to experiment now. Instead of the school telling me that my girl has 70 marks in math and it's not so good, it tells you exactly which of the knowledge graph points they're not good at. Instead of everyone doing the same regurgitation of exercises, Chinese kids have 3 hours of homework every day. They're burdened with stuff. It gives you tailored exercises which helps you. Right. In your particular point.
Exactly.
We're at a point where we can do that.
Right.
But it requires getting everyone to work together. It requires the teachers to change a little bit the way they do it. It requires principals to think a little bit differently. It requires students to do it differently, parents to do it differently. But I think we can get there. And it starts with one change at a time.
That's right.
I find that once you have a success case somewhere, doesn't matter where it is, then others get confidence and then start doing it replicate it. So that's what keeps us motivated in doing this.
Well, let's leave it at that. The children are the future. Thank you. Thanks everyone
so
much for being here.